All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Evernest Real Estate Investor Podcast. I am your host, or one of your hosts, Spencer Sutton, and I've got back with me today Matthew Whitaker and Gray Hall. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Great. I think it's pretty clear Spencer just thinks this is his show.
This is my show.
We're basically like co-pilots on this thing. He's like, everybody sit back, put your seatbelt on. What do you think about that, Gray?
I think, Spencer, man, he's trying to run the show, and we're just here to support him. It's Spencer's world.
I just want to make sure y'all don't screw this whole thing up. Sometimes I decide, well, they can co-host or not co-host. But
that's luckily going to happen. We're definitely going to screw it up.
Luckily, to help us today not screw things up and to help make this whole conversation more interesting, we've got a guest. Gray, why don't you introduce our guest?
Man, we got one of my favorite guys here, Jim Strickland out of Jackson, Mississippi. Jim's been one of our agents for a while. Super glad to have him on the team. Just, great culture fit for Evernest. Really knows his stuff. Investors love working with him. And so I think y'all are going to get a lot of good information today. So Jim, glad to have you here. And would love you to introduce yourself and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into Jackson and real estate.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited to be here on the show. Thanks for having me.
Even if you are a LeBron fan, I'm going to still let you stay on the show.
And an Auburn fan. I mean, I can't believe we didn't highlight the fact that he's
that's why he's one of my favorite guys here, because he's not a Bama fan like you guys.
Yeah. First off, War Eagle. So sorry, I didn't properly.
Oh, goodness, we just lost half the audience.
Yeah, you can trust him, except for the fact that he went to Auburn.
Oh, I am excited to be here. I've been helping source deals and find great investment homes for a little while here in Mississippi, and I've been a realtor for about 3 years. And so I've got experience on the retail side, lots of leasing experience, as well as finding awesome deals for investment homes.
I think it's key you highlight. Jim spent a lot of time leasing. I think it's one thing that we talk about. I think it's really important for investor agents to have experience, like knowing the local market, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is buying investment properties for investors, and you got to know the end use. And so, people who focus retail all the time, they might struggle with kind of getting accurate rent numbers. And so having somebody who's had property management experience or leasing experience, I mean, that's the one thing that can really screw up an investment is if you, miscalculate what the projected rent's going to be. That right off the bat can get things wrong. And so Jim's got a lot of experience. I think it's good to highlight that. Just kind of knowing. So when you're asking him for rent estimates on certain properties, he's gonna give a pretty darn good estimate for the area.
And I would be horrified to trust an agent that doesn't have at least some experience leasing houses or understanding the rental process. You definitely don't want to find an agent that is all about the transaction, that needs to get a transaction closed. So the fact that Jim's got a bunch of that leasing experience obviously is super helpful as you put your numbers together.
I've never been busier in my life than when I was purely doing leasing here, and which is, props to Mississippi. There's a lot of people looking to rent homes, but that was the busiest I've ever been.
Well, hey, that's a good thing for investors. I mean, rental demand is a super important thing when you're buying a house, and knowing which areas have the most demand. And I think leasing, you get some frontline experience, kind of knowing not only like rental rates, but also kind of like what houses do tenants prefer, and you can kind of get an insight into these types of houses lease quicker. And so asking those questions, when you've got a house, what kind of renovations do I need? What are important for tenant? And also kind of knowing on the backside of the property management, when a tenant first moves in is when you typically have issues. And so you can kind of get ahead and be planning for some of the repairs, things to hit on the front end. And if you build those numbers into your pro forma, you're going to be set up for success there, opposed to being hit with maybe a lower rent number or some repairs that you're not expected for. I think that's one of our job, as agents, is to kind of prepare buyers and, give them the best estimate and assumption so that their investment can be successful. And so all of those kind of play in. It's really great to have that frontline experience, and excited to hear about kind of Jackson as a whole. So we'd love to hear from you, kind of give us the overview of, what do investors need to know just about the city of Jackson and kind of the surrounding areas.
Basically, by the time we're done talking, you guys are going to be flocking to call me, and everybody's going to be trying to invest in Jackson, Mississippi, because it is a golden egg here in the city. It's not the place that people first think of. It's not a huge market. It's not where the first place people think of as I dream to live there one day. So, I mean, when you combine Mississippi's probably one of the lowest, if not the lowest cost of living. A lot of lower taxes, lots of new jobs are coming in because of that, because it's so easy for the employees to find housing, as well as cheap commercial office space. There's just a ton of reasons. I don't want to give all the good juice away at the very beginning of the podcast. But yeah, it's a great opportunity.
And you mentioned the low cost of living. That's one theme I've heard in kind of talking to investors, is that when investors are looking for yield, like yield right now is a tough thing to find as home prices go up. Historically, Jackson's been a market that's been about 1% higher in just kind of the yield basis. And so really strong rent to price ratios. And so talk a little bit about that. Is that still kind of consistent from what I've heard? And is that what investors are still able to find good kind of cash flowing properties?
Yeah, there's tons of great cash flow properties because of that reason. People come willing to pay a little bit more for rental homes because they don't initially expect to stay long-term in Jackson. They come for medical school, or they get a new job at the Nissan plant, and they come to feel out the area because it's not their dream to stay. Of course, they find that this place is a hidden gem, and it is a great long-term place, in my opinion. But yeah, I agree with that statement about the yield, Gray.
Yeah. And you talked about the medical school. I know that's big there. What are some of the other big employers? Government's big. I think it's capital of Mississippi, right? So what are some kind of the big employers there? Because that's important to investors is, hey, do people have jobs? Can they pay the rent? And so people are looking at, are there job growth? Is it a place where companies, is there a stable population of just kind of employers? And so what does that kind of look like for Jackson?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's the capital of Mississippi. So government jobs, just in the past 5 years, we've got a Nissan plant, we got an Amazon facility, Continental Tires, huge opportunities.
We were joking about this on, I think, at this podcast or something else I was recording. I wonder when Amazon is going to stop being a sexy thing to talk about.
They
just grown so fast. Yeah, in Columbus. I think it's something investors talk about. I think it's important because they provide a lot of jobs, but
tons of jobs.
It seems like every podcast I talk about, there's a Amazon plant mentioned somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So jobs are huge, but one of the next big things would be colleges, universities. There's at least 10 college and universities within 45 miles of here. And yeah, so that's a huge opportunity for investors because a lot of them don't live on campus, especially because the cost of living's affordable here. And students are great. A lot of investors already know this, but students are great renters because they've got grants and scholarship money, et cetera.
And Deion Sanders is a football coach there in Jackson now too. So there's that.
I have to admit, I tweeted at Deion Sanders because he tweeted when he was coming to Jackson. He said, "Looking for a great realtor." And I'll be honest, I took my shot.
Did you? And he passed you up, huh?
He passed me up along with probably a couple hundred.
Probably. So tell us kind of the lay of the land. Like if we, let's say we came to Jackson and you were just going to kind of ride us around and give us kind of the lay of the land. Just give us a 20,000 foot view of how Jackson works.
If I was to take you guys on a tour of Jackson, first off, I would take you to Kiefer's little Greek spot. It's my favorite place to eat. But anyways, in terms of investing, I would take you first to Madison. Just because it's my favorite spot. It's got your A neighborhoods. It's got the best school system. It's centrally located, easy to get to any area of Jackson, whether that's Clinton, Pearl, Brandon.
And Madison's on the kind of the northern side, right, of what you call proper. And a lot of the things that we're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, there's Jackson kind of city, and then we're kind of talking about the metro area. And so Madison's kind of one of those suburbs, it looks like on the northern side, if you're looking at the map, and that's the area that Jim's talking about.
Yes. I'd start out north at Madison. That's going to be your top spot, a little bit higher cost, but also the highest rental cost as well, rental prices. Is that what you're asking, Matthew, in terms of different areas?
So just kind of take me around the city and give me an idea of, what's west of town, what's south of town, and just give us some names so that when investors pull up the map, because I have this vision of people when they're listening to us or looking at the map, and just kind of go around and kind of give us some highlights of some areas that you really like if you were driving us around for a day.
Absolutely. So I would start, like I said, at the top at Madison. So we're on the north side, and we would really stay on the east side going south. So we'd go south to Ridgeland, and then we in Pearl and Brandon, all kind of on the east side of Jackson. And we'll kind of hit some highlights of those areas as well. The D-class areas that aren't as popular for investors would be West and South Jackson. So when we go from Madison to Ridgeland, Brandon, Flowood, Pearl, and then flip on the far west side, we have Clinton. And that actually is probably the second highest, most popular at the moment. The only reason Clinton isn't quite as good as Madison is it's about a 15 to 20 minute drive.
And so as you look at the map and we start at Madison and we start to walk through those cities, kind of tell us, Madison, you said it's kind of A class. Take us through, how those classes change as you move kind of south and east through the city.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Madison, like you said, is your A class. Your Ridgeland and your Brandon has got your A and B, kind of B plus, I would say on average.
And what are the ages of those houses in that area?
The ages of your Ridgeland, which is getting a little bit closer to Jackson, are a little bit on the 30-year range. Ridgeland are on a little bit older. Madison, you have your new to 15-year houses. Flowood, you have your new to 15-year houses on a vast range. Brandon has got a huge range because you've got new Brandon, which is close to the reservoir for anybody looking at the map. And there's old Brandon, which is below I-20. Old Brandon is the older houses. It's going to have your 15 to 30-year-old houses. Your new Brandon's, the home I live in right now, is about 10 years old. So you've got about 5 to 15, 20-year range. And then Pearl is going to have your 10 to 40-year range, huge range.
30 years doesn't seem very old to me.
Not at all.
I'm thinking about buying investment property.
We're buying brand new houses there.
Yeah,
I know, seriously.
There's a lot of growth here, a lot of new houses. 30-year is old to me, but wow. I mean, if you guys really
want to, just breaking in well in Birmingham at 30 years.
Gracious.
If you really want a 50-year house, I can certainly find you that.
Yeah, where would you find? Because typically in most of the markets, it sounds like that's kind of a lot of the A and B class stuff. When you start talking about kind of C stuff, which is where kind of the bread and butter of rental, at most markets you can kind of find the best deals and maybe some of the best cap rates. Where would some of those houses be? Maybe in the 1945 to 1970, and they're probably sprinkled in, but is there kind of concentration of some of those maybe C class properties?
Yeah, those C class properties would be that old Brandon south of I-20, your Pearl, and some in Ridgeland. A little bit closer you get to Jackson, a little bit older the homes. I guess that a lot of, in history, a lot of people moved out. I would say that's a.
And talk about take a house, just kind of your average house in an area like Pearl, and tell us, what does that house look like? What does it rent for? What can we buy them for? Just give us kind of some general numbers. I know it's hard to be specific, but give us some general numbers.
You can buy a rental home for, anywhere from 100 to 160,000 in Pearl, and you're going to be able to rent that. So a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, an average size home, you're going to be able to rent for. So if it's 120 to 160,000 range, you're going to be able to rent that for really at least I'm saying 1,300, 1,500, sometimes even 1,600.
That's good. Wow, that's great for a C class.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's close to. I mean, most investors are kind of chasing the 1% rule now. That kind of died easily to find in most of these markets, and so we're kind of probably more seeing that 0.8 rule, and that kind of lines up with it. But if you can buy it for 130 and rent it for 1,200, or buy it for 150 and rent it for 1,400, those are pretty good metrics right now, and better than that's a better spread than I'm seeing in some of these other markets that we've got agents on.
Yeah, no, yeah. If you buy, let's say I said 120 to 160, so let's say 140,000 in Pearl, a 3.2 on average. And you got to put, let's say $20,000 of rehab. So that puts us about 160,000. That home, I would say right in the median, 1,500 a month. So it's very close to that 1% rule.
And I think that's a good example of why I've heard investors kind of like Jackson, because you can still get those numbers there.
One of the reasons you can still get those numbers is because from what I understand, compared to other markets, there are institutional buyers buying here, but it's not nearly to the same degree as other homes. So the competition isn't quite as high yet. Now they're starting to buy because they realize the opportunity. And so it is only going to get harder, and getting closer to that 1% rule will be tough. But I think that's one of the main reasons.
I think there's pros and cons of that. I mean, we've seen that in some other markets. I think they kind of help put out a pretty good level of house, and some of these other markets too, it kind of creates this floor, and so kind of decreases the risk. So yeah, I've heard institutions like there, and I know a couple have been buying there for a little bit. But I think still plenty of opportunities from what I've heard from you, just kind of catching up just about retail investors.
Oh, exactly. It's early. It's early because they're institutional buyers here, it's not nearly to the degree as Birmingham, Atlanta, et cetera.
Yeah. And so maybe talk about, so that's kind of a C class. Maybe what about in Brandon? Are the numbers similar there? Are they any different?
Brandon and Pearl are super similar.
Okay.
Until you get to New Brandon, which is close to the reservoir. And that's a little bit New Brandon. It's newer homes. It's a little bit higher pricing, but you're also able to rent a little bit higher. So if you want to say 160 to 200 range, and you're going to be able to rent Brandon home for 1,600 to 1,750.
Which is still good. I mean, look, when you're buying a newer home, you're going to have less CapEx and less maintenance. And so, the numbers kind of at a cash flow standpoint might actually be kind of similar. And so just something for investors to think about, like kind of the vintage of the house, a lot of times can determine, your kind of long-term maintenance. And that can be one of the biggest variables that hard to estimate for, but you kind of decrease your chances of some bigger maintenance bills if you're buying some of those newer properties. And then go ahead, Spence.
Well, I was just going to say, Jim, you mentioned Clinton, which is out further west. And it's interesting because you said it's far out from Jackson's, like 20-minute drive. And that seems insane to like people who are used to being in Atlanta and Nashville and Denver and all these places. But is the rental demand still out there in Clinton? Like, tell us a little bit about that area.
Yeah, the rental demand in Clinton is, honestly, I've done more deals in Clinton over the past 2 months than any of the areas. So I guess I would say that's definitely on the rise. When I say 20 minutes, that's nothing compared to probably most people, probably anybody listening to this.
That's the commute from the parking lot to the office building in some of these metro cities.
That's right.
Yeah, we're spoiled here in Mississippi. But I guess for people coming, when I say a distance, most of those big factories coming in, the Nissan plant, there are going to be a 20 to 25-minute drive for Clinton. So the people coming from out of town aren't initially looking for Clinton. But a lot of times when they realize, hey, this is a great place to live, they're like, Clinton's it's one of your nicer neighborhoods, great school system. So
there's a college.
Did you say that was the A or B class?
Yeah, there are A class areas. So I'd probably say like a B plus.
B plus in Clinton.
And overall. And they do. Mississippi College is right there in Clinton. So
yeah, my brother went down there. So I went over there. It's a good area. And I think, does that drive a lot? It's a pretty small school. And so you probably have a portion of college students there, but it's not like all college. It sounds like there's people who will still kind of live out there and maybe commute into Jackson or maybe remote work. It sounds like those types of people might also kind of buy there.
Yeah, it's nice that it has a college there, but it certainly isn't. It's not just the college. It's got its own economy over there, and without the college, they would still be a high demand area.
Yeah. What about you mentioned you've done some deals over there. What kind of general numbers, like we talked about with Brandon and Pearl, like what can an investor expect to pay for a house, and then what can you expect it to rent for?
Yeah. So in Clinton, the rental homes are close to that New Brandon price. Ridgeland, 160,000 to 195 is, I'd probably say that is actually the range of all the homes I've done in the past 2 months. And they're going to be able to all rent for 1,500 to one of the homes I closed on. It should be able to rent for 1,850 if it's not already rented right now.
And what'd you buy that for?
That home particular, I'm gonna have to look that up, Gray. That home, I believe, was at the 190 to 195 range purchase price, but not a lot of rehab.
Oh yeah, that's great. I mean, less cash up front. If you're financing it, it's always nice to have to not manage a contractor and kind of be able to get in there and get it cash flowing. So those are really strong numbers. I mean, in other markets, you're seeing a bigger spread where that A180 house might only rent for 13, 14, maybe 1,500. And so you just have a little bit of extra cushion in there, which is great. I mean, yeah, making your dollars go further and getting that little bit higher yield once you're hitting kind of base singles and you're building a portfolio of 5, 10, 15 houses, that cash flow can really, really add up. And so, yeah, that's awesome to hear. It sounds like that's a good area that investors need to look at.
Yeah. They're also similar in terms of you're going to be able to get close to 1% in Madison, Pearl, Flowood, Brandon, Clinton. It's really a matter of like, if you're a brand new investor and you don't necessarily have the ability to buy a $200,000 house in Madison, which would be a great rental. I have tons of options that you can, buy houses close to 100,000, sometimes even lower, like in Pearl.
And I've heard, so some markets are different. Some markets are heavy MLS. Some have a really kind of heavy off market presence. Where does Jackson fall on that kind of range or spectrum?
In terms of off market?
Yeah. Is there a lot of off market activity? Are you finding deals off market or investors kind of mainly finding stuff off the MLS?
I have a portfolio right now, or just if I put all the off-market deals together, I probably have 30 different homes that are ready to be bought by investors. So I'd say that's pretty healthy, just for me, just starting out.
I would say so too. I mean, my gosh, that sounds like quite a deal. I mean, you've got a bunch of those listings or pocket listings, and that, I also think through like having a great agent is somebody that knows a lot of people in the area, and having those off market listings, just a reflection of that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm off market right now because inventory is what people are struggling for. And we've seen that in the MLS side, just not as many houses. Now there's seasonality and kind of some of the factors just kind of on the macro scale we've seen. And so yeah, having the off market, network with wholesalers or other agents that, bring you deals first is definitely a benefit to your client. And so it sounds like, hey, we got 30 deals. So maybe somebody reach out and help Jim sell some of these and get y'all some good investments.
Yeah. They're not all my official listings yet, but they're ready to be sold now. So I would say there's more off market. There's more homes right now to be bought than there are investors yet.
Yeah, I've heard that. So it's interesting. I've heard that from other wholesalers that Jackson, there's a lot of off market activity, and so yeah, I think
you ought to be able to get a pretty good deal then.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
Yeah, you can.
So tell us a little bit, Jim. Tell us how you work. Speaking of investors, typically, how does the process work when an investor reaches out to you?
When an investor reaches out to me, the first thing that I like to do is get to know them first. What are they hoping to achieve from this? Why are they investing? Of course, I need to know, what is their budget? How much can they afford? What kind of areas do they live in Jackson? Do they have certain areas they like? A lot of investors don't actually live here.
How do they typically hear about, like, how do they know that, hey, Jackson's a place that is super interesting to me?
I think since I've been at Evernest the past few months, we have such an excellent reputation that a lot of investors that have homes in Birmingham, Atlanta, all across the country, they are contacting me through our system just because they have so much trust. And so if that answers your question.
Yeah. I was just curious. So you talk to them about why they want to invest. They talk about, their budget, what they're looking for. And then what's the process? Do you just start like bringing them deals just based on like, hey, their buy box?
Exactly. Once I've gotten to know them, to establish that rapport. So I mean, it's important to get to know them personally as well, so I can serve them best. But once I have their buy box, I just put them on my list and I start sending them deals whenever I have an off market or on market deal.
Are you able to, when you send those deals out, are you giving them rent and rehab numbers? Because that's one of the hardest things, I think, for investors who might be learning about Jackson at first. Is that something you're able to give them is, hey, this is a $108,000 house. This is going to rent for this much. And it's probably going to take about this much to rent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Great. Yeah. Whatever information. I give them everything up front. Some investors are more experienced, of course, and they already are able to establish that information. But I'm here to provide everything from what's this house really worth? What's the ARV? What can it rent for? What's the market rent? What is this going to cost me in terms of everything from taxes to projected maintenance cost? I'm able to walk through an investor who has no clue how to even start or what has never tried investing before, all the way to an institutional buyer.
And Jim, you mentioned about taxes. What can an investor expect for real estate taxes when they're buying properties here?
Sure. It's around 0.8%, which is lower than half the national average. And there's certain areas in Jackson that I can help guide investors that are higher, which the closer you get to downtown Jackson is a little bit higher in taxes. But in general, 0.8% is really awesome. Property tax.
That is good. All right. So Jim, tell me a little bit about, like, as far as I know, investors like to know, is this a landlord friendly area or is it not? What are your thoughts on Jackson?
Yeah. Mississippi really does have strong legislation protecting landlords here. It's really not a difficult process at all if a tenant needs to be evicted.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's good. And investors always kind of want to know that. And there's different states that have different kind of requirements. And look, hopefully that never happens. But if you build a big enough portfolio, you might have some issues with tenant, they lose their job, et cetera. And so always just kind of good to know that information while we try to put the best tenants in there. And if you're managing yourself, make sure to put the right tenants in there because it can be a painful process to get tenants out. But good to know that that's how Mississippi kind of operates.
Absolutely.
All right. Is there anything else, Jim, that you think investors need to know about Jackson, Mississippi? This is your chance. Like, you can sell Jackson to the listeners right now.
We didn't mention the Naval Air Station, which is great. So strong military market as well. There's another point to add in.
That's good.
We could probably go on for another hour at least of reasons to invest in Mississippi, but really to summarize, one of the most affordable to live states, affordable to buy houses, strong market rent rates, and you're early on. You're really going to be
not a ton of competition.
Exactly. The competition is not nearly as high as most surrounding states.
Music to an investor's ears.
That's right. They want to find deals. That's what they want.
All right, Jim, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for talking through Jackson, Mississippi. Excited to get some investors connected with you to answer some of those questions about the market, help you find some deals. If investors do want to know about the market or want to find some deals, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, it would be my pleasure to talk with any of you guys. Please call me. My cell phone, personal cell, is 504-451-1874. You can text me as well if that's easier for you. You can also email me at jstrickland@evernest.co.
All right, Jim, thanks again, man, for being here. We really appreciate it. And we'll have you back on. Like, I have a feeling you will be back on. We are looking for properties in all of these areas. So when you find us a property, we're going to buy it and we'll come back and do a deep dive into some deals. So thanks again for being here. And listen, if you haven't already, leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see your name on there. Give us some comments. It helps other investors find this podcast. So we'll be back next week with another episode.